Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. We are looking at a hot day in Riverside today, with the temperature reaching a high of 93.6 degrees and dipping down to 67.6 later tonight, so please plan accordingly. In the show today, we are going to look at how the ongoing conflict in the Middle East is creating significant bottlenecks for global supply chains. We will also examine the reasons behind a prominent election security official quietly advocating for a ban on voting machines. Of course, we have several other important stories to cover as well throughout the hour. Stay with us as we dive into all of these developments and everything else you need to know on Alex's News. We begin this morning with a conflict that's reshaping the global order. A joint U.S.-Israeli offensive against Iran is now in its 17th day, and the fallout has spread far beyond the battlefield. Ethan covers international security for us, and he's been tracking this since it started. Ethan, take us back to how this all began.
It started on February 28th with a massive surprise air campaign called Operation Epic Fury. Israel refers to it as Operation Roaring Lion. NBC6 South Florida and Al Jazeera both report it targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, military infrastructure, and top government leadership. The scale of the initial strikes was enormous, and within hours, it became clear this wasn't a limited operation. This was designed to cripple Iran's military capabilities in one coordinated blow.
And one of the most significant outcomes was the death of Iran's supreme leader.
That's right. Intelligence reports indicate that Ali Khamenei was killed when his residence in Tehran was destroyed during those opening strikes. After a brief period with an interim governing council, the Assembly of Experts officially elected his son, Mojtaba Khamenei, as the new supreme leader on March 9th. CBS News and other intelligence sources suggest Mojtaba himself may have been wounded in the initial attacks. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, insists the new leader is in good health. But that hasn't quieted the speculation.
So who's actually running Iran's military response right now?
By all credible accounts, it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. They've consolidated operational authority and are directing what amounts to a multi-front retaliatory campaign across the entire Persian Gulf. The leadership transition may look orderly on paper, but in practice, the IRGC has taken the wheel. That's a significant development because it means military hardliners are calling the shots, not diplomats.
And that retaliation has hit countries most people wouldn't expect to see in the crossfire.
Exactly. Iran has gone after U.S. allies across the region in a dramatic way. The Associated Press, reporting through 95.5 WSB and Al Jazeera, have detailed strikes on the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Dubai International Airport, the world's busiest hub for international travel, had to suspend all flights after a drone strike ignited a massive fire at a fuel storage tank. In Abu Dhabi, missile strikes killed a Palestinian civilian, bringing the UAE's death toll to 7. Iran also targeted the Fujairah oil port and, notably, an Amazon Web Services data center.
They hit a cloud computing facility?
They did, and that speaks to how this war is different from past conflicts. Iran isn't just targeting military installations, it's going after digital and economic infrastructure too. Saudi Defense Forces intercepted a barrage of 60 drones and several missiles aimed at Riyadh and the Ras Tanura refinery. In Kuwait, drones struck the international airport and Ali Al Salam Air Base. And in Bahrain, the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters came under fire, along with civilian financial centers, including Citibank buildings. This is a region-wide assault on both military and economic targets.
What about the toll in Israel and Lebanon?
Israel expanded the conflict by launching ground operations in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah's elite Radwan unit. WSB Radio reports Israeli strikes have killed more than 850 people in Lebanon and displaced 850,000. In Gaza, the humanitarian situation is catastrophic. Roughly 61 million tons of rubble covers the strip, and the Rafah crossing remains closed. NBC6 South Florida puts the overall death toll at more than 1,200 in Iran, 850 in Lebanon, and 15 in Israel, The U.S. has confirmed 15 service members killed as well.
Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because that's where the global impact really accelerates.
It does, and this is the piece that affects everyone listening this morning. Iran's foreign minister says the strait is only closed to U.S. and Israeli vessels, but WSB radio reports the instability has essentially halted all commercial shipping through the waterway. About 20% of the world's traded oil and 25% of liquefied natural gas pass through Hormuz. With that traffic frozen, Brent crude has surged to $105 a barrel. Specialized economic analyses suggest it could spike as high as $165 if this drags on.
So we're already seeing the energy shock. But I've heard analysts describe this as a triple shock.
That's the term being used because it goes well beyond oil prices. The second piece is semiconductors. Reports indicate we're facing a potential 40% shortage in high-end logic chips, things like CPUs and GPUs. Energy rationing in manufacturing hubs like South Korea and Taiwan is part of the problem, but there's also a shortage of helium and rare gases sourced from Qatar that are essential for chip manufacturing. It's a connection most people don't think about, but it links Gulf energy to every smartphone and laptop on the planet.
And the third shock hits the food supply.
It does, and it might be the most devastating over time. The Middle East exports about 30% of the world's urea and nitrogen-based fertilizers, and those shipments are now blocked. Fertilizer prices have already spiked. The Food and Agriculture Organization warns that reduced crop yields this year will push an additional 180 million people into acute food insecurity by 2027. Al Jazeera also highlights a massive risk to India specifically, with $50 billion in remittances at stake as 9 million Indian expatriates in the Gulf face extreme uncertainty.
How is the White House responding to all of this?
President Trump has issued a blunt ultimatum. According to NBC6 South Florida, he's demanded that 7 nations, including NATO allies and China, deploy warships to what he's calling a Hormuz coalition to forcibly reopen the strait. He warned NATO members that the alliance faces a, quote, very bad, end quote, future if they don't step up. And he's threatened China with universal 50% tariffs if Beijing refuses to contribute naval forces. It's the kind of high-pressure diplomacy that leaves very little room for negotiation.
And are allies actually getting on board?
Not in the way Washington wants. The Guardian and European Interest report that France and Germany remain deeply skeptical of the American military approach. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas is weighing whether to expand an existing naval mission called Operation Aspides or form an independent European coalition of the willing. The preference in Europe is clearly to avoid getting pulled into a wider war under U.S. command. The United Kingdom under Prime Minister Keir Starmer has opted for technical support, exploring mine-hunting drones rather than sending major warships.
What about countries in the Pacific?
Australia and Japan have both explicitly refused to send warships into the combat zone. Australia is contributing surveillance jets to the UAE, but that's the extent of it. The reluctance makes sense when you consider the legal picture. Analyses of the North Atlantic Treaty show that Article 6 limits collective defense obligations to the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer. The Persian Gulf falls well outside that zone, so NATO allies aren't legally bound to participate. Any involvement is purely a political choice.
So who is stepping up in the region itself?
This is one of the more interesting developments. India, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia have formed a trilateral maritime security pact called Operation Trident Shield. It's designed to secure the Red Sea and Gulf shipping lanes independently of the U.S. command structure. That signals a real shift toward regional self-reliance. Meanwhile, China has carved out its own lane, signaling what it calls a parallel escort mechanism. Beijing will protect China-linked vessels but won't align militarily with the United States. So you've got multiple competing naval frameworks emerging in real time.
Where does the military situation actually stand today?
The Israeli military claims it's destroyed 70% of Iran's missile launchers and 85% of its air defenses. But Al Jazeera and independent military analysts point out that Iran's continued ability to hit Dubai and Riyadh suggests those numbers may be inflated by propaganda. Iran has invested heavily in what are called missile cities, underground tunnel networks that allow mobile asymmetrical strikes. So even if surface-level damage is significant, Iran clearly still has teeth.
So as we sit here on day 17, what's the bottom line?
The Strait of Hormuz remains functionally closed to Western allied shipping. The energy crisis is real and accelerating. The semiconductor and food supply disruptions are building toward consequences we'll feel for months, possibly years. The diplomatic picture is fractured, with no unified international response in sight. The question now is whether any of these competing coalitions can break the blockade before we cross the line from crisis into irreversible global supply chain collapse.
Ethan, thank you for walking us through all of that. We'll keep following this throughout the morning. Still ahead, we have our second story coming up right after this. Our second story this morning digs into a controversy that's been simmering inside one of the federal agencies responsible for keeping our elections secure. Chloe, you've been following the saga around Donald Palmer and the Election Assistance Commission. Catch us up.
So Donald Palmer is a Republican appointee on the EAC, which is the federal body that certifies voting machines and sets security standards. He's a veteran election official who works closely with the Department of Homeland Security and CISA, the cybersecurity agency. On the surface, his job is to make sure electronic voting systems are safe and reliable. But about 2 years ago, Rolling Stone published an investigation that painted a very different picture of what he actually believes behind closed doors.
What did that Rolling Stone report reveal exactly?
According to Rolling Stone, leaked audio recordings and internal communications showed Palmer privately wanted electronic voting machines abolished entirely. That's a pretty stunning contradiction when you consider he's one of the top referees for voting technology in the country. The magazine described it as a fox in the henhouse scenario. Here's a federal official publicly vouching for machine security while privately aligning himself with a movement that views those same machines as a threat to democracy.
And this wasn't just a philosophical preference. He had real ties to activists pushing this agenda, right?
That's what makes it so significant. Both Rolling Stone and Truthout have highlighted Palmer's close relationship with Cleta Mitchell, the conservative lawyer who was directly involved in Donald Trump's efforts to challenge Georgia's 2020 vote count. Palmer reportedly attended private meetings and appeared on panels hosted by Mitchell's Election Integrity Network. In those settings, he allegedly signaled agreement with pushing out electronic machines entirely in favor of hand-counted paper ballots. Voting rights advocates found that deeply alarming, because hand counting is historically less accurate, slower, more expensive, and actually more susceptible to human error.
So when the Trump administration returned, how did that change Palmer's ability to act on any of this?
It gave him a much bigger platform. Nearly a year ago, on March 25, 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14248, titled Preserving and Protecting the Integrity of American Elections. According to the EAC's own website and Truthout, Palmer was serving as EAC chairman at that point and became instrumental in translating that executive order into actual regulatory changes. He was suddenly in the driver's seat for reshaping how the federal government oversees voting technology.
What kind of regulatory changes are we talking about?
One of the biggest moves was amending the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, known as VVSG 2.1. Under Palmer's leadership, the EAC banned any voting system that encodes votes in barcodes or QR codes. Instead, every certified system now has to produce a paper record that a human being can actually read and verify. He also oversaw certification of a new generation of machines built around what's called software independence, meaning the vote count can be verified through paper without relying on the machine's internal software.
Was there a security testing component to this too?
There was, and it came from Congress rather than the executive branch. The 2025 National Defense Authorization Act included requirements for penetration testing of all voting systems. Palmer implemented those requirements, which essentially means hiring experts to try to hack into voting machines to find vulnerabilities before bad actors can. That piece of the puzzle actually drew some bipartisan support because it's harder to argue against stress testing the systems we rely on for elections.
Now here's what I find fascinating. Given his private views, Did Palmer actually push for a full ban on machines?
That's the twist that surprises a lot of people. His official actions as of today have actually been more moderate than the hand count movement wanted. According to reports from the Election Center and the EAC's website, Palmer has maintained that while the record of every vote must be on paper, the actual counting should still be done by machine scanners. He's argued that's the best way to maintain both speed and accuracy on election night.
So the hand count purists didn't get everything they wanted from him?
Not even close, and some of them were quite frustrated. About 8 months ago, in July 2025, Palmer explicitly told state election directors that the EAC would not pursue what he called a mass decertification of existing electronic systems. He cited the prohibitive costs that would fall on local jurisdictions and stressed the need for electoral stability. He's actually gone on the record defending EAC-certified optical scanners, saying they provide the transparency voters deserve when paired with hand-marked paper ballots.
That's a real balancing act. But critics aren't letting him off the hook, are they?
Not at all. NPR and the New York Times have both reported on broader concerns about election trust, and Palmer's situation fits right into that conversation. The core argument from critics is that having a federal official who privately disparages the very systems he's supposed to secure ends up fueling conspiracy theories. Even if his official policies are reasonable, the leaked recordings undermine voter confidence because people wonder whose interests he's really serving.
Rolling Stone also raised the possibility of a conflict of interest. What was that about?
That was one of the more explosive allegations in the original investigation. Rolling Stone suggested Palmer may have provided inside information to activists who are actively suing states to stop the use of electronic voting systems. If true, that would mean a sitting federal commissioner was essentially feeding ammunition to people trying to dismantle the technology his agency certifies. Critics have warned this could amount to a kind of policy sabotage, where certification of newer and more secure technology gets stalled or delayed to force jurisdictions back toward manual counting.
How does all of this connect to the broader Project 2025 agenda?
Palmer's role is often viewed through that lens. Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for the second Trump administration, proposed stripping the Department of Homeland Security and CISA of their election security missions entirely. Figures associated with that movement, like former DHS official Ken Cuccinelli, have argued that federal oversight of elections is government overreach and that voting machines are inherently vulnerable. Palmer's position at the EAC put him right at the intersection of those goals and the practical reality of running elections.
Where does Palmer stand today in terms of his role at the agency?
He concluded his term as EIC chairman last month, in February, but he continues to serve as a commissioner, so he still has a vote and a voice in federal election policy. His legacy so far is that he successfully shifted the federal standard toward requiring paper-only records of every vote, which many election security experts actually support. But the bigger question of whether to move to full hand counting remains out of his hands, because that's governed by state and local law, not federal mandate.
So states are ultimately the ones who decide whether to ditch machines entirely?
Exactly. The EAC sets certification standards, but it can't force a state to abandon its voting systems. Some states and counties have experimented with hand counting, and the results have generally been messy, with longer wait times, higher costs, and more errors. That real-world evidence has actually slowed the momentum of the hand count movement at the state level, even as the rhetoric at the federal level has intensified. It's a reminder that election administration in this country is incredibly decentralized, and that's both a strength and a vulnerability.
It really is one of those stories where the behind-the-scenes dynamics matter just as much as the public policy.
Maybe even more. Palmer's tenure is already being studied as a landmark case in what happens when the people overseeing a system have fundamental doubts about whether that system should exist. Whether you see him as a reformer who brought needed transparency or a fox in the henhouse undermining election security from within really depends on which version of Donald Palmer you believe is the real one, the public official or the private critic.
Chloe, really appreciate you walking us through all of that. Thanks for the reporting.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. In a move that's been 7 years in the making, the United States is finally letting its colors fly again in Caracas. Following the capture of former leader Nicolas Maduro back in January, diplomatic relations are being retired and reestablished. The U.S. flag was raised this past weekend as part of a phased approach to bring political reconciliation and economic recovery to the region under the interim leadership of acting President Delcy Rodriguez. It seems the Treasury Department is also planting the seeds for a new partnership. They've issued updated licenses to allow Venezuelan fertilizers to flow directly to American farmers, while officials like Interior Secretary Doug Burgum are drilling down into the nation's vast mineral and oil reserves. Acting President Rodriguez is refining her stance, calling for a total lifting of trade sanctions. As for Mr. Maduro, he'll have his day in court in New York on March 26th. Moving to the Middle East, the Israeli military is grounding its strategy in southern Lebanon. Troops from the 91st Division have advanced 7 to 9 kilometers into what's being called a security buffer zone. This groundbreaking expansion aims to dismantle Hezbollah's military routes south of the Litani River. To keep things moving, the Israeli government is considering a massive mobilization of up to 450,000 reservists, which would double down on their previous troop ceiling. The humanitarian toll is heavy, with over 800,000 civilians displaced, while the global energy market is feeling the burn as oil prices have surged 40 to 50%. On Capitol Hill, Senate Majority Leader John Thune is tuning up for a major legislative performance. The Senate is scheduled to begin floor proceedings on the Save America Act. This voter-centric bill would mandate hard proof of citizenship, like a passport or birth certificate, to register to vote, and ID everyone using mail-in ballots with mandatory photocopies. While the president has vetoed the idea of passing any other legislation until this act clears the floor, the National Association of Counties is counting the costs, warning of over $500 million in unfunded mandates. It looks like a marathon talking session is on the horizon, as the bill currently lacks the 60 votes needed to stamp out a Democratic filibuster. In the world of trade, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are milking their latest meeting for all it's worth. Negotiators have officially launched the first round of talks to review the USMCA sunset clause. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer is steering the conversation towards stricter rules on Chinese goods and is looking to churn up more access to Canada's dairy market. With $1.6 trillion in annual trade on the line, any failure to renew the treaty could trigger a 10-year countdown to expiration. It's a heavy-duty situation for the automotive and agricultural sectors, which drive $4 billion in goods across the borders every single day. Finally, we have some beef in Colorado. 3,800 workers at the Swift Beef Company plant in Greeley are stepping off the line this morning. This strike, organized by the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 7, follows a 99% yes vote after their contract expired at midnight. It's a rare occurrence, the first major beef slaughterhouse strike since the 1980s. Workers are grilling management over safety concerns and poverty-level wages. With the national cattle population at a 75-year low, these high stakes could lead to even meatier prices at the grocery store. JBS USA says they'll try to keep moving forward with 2 shifts, but the union says economic anxiety is well done and at an all-time high. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.